burned everything she loved to ash. Her father, her mother, her two young brothers who never got the chance to become men. And now she stands in the great hall of the man who held the torch, handed over like a piece of livestock, a living symbol of peace built on graves. But Frida isn't just a war prize. She has eyes that see what others miss, a mind that remembers every detail. And in the shadows of this frozen stronghold, she's starting to notice something terrifying. The massacre of her family wasn't just revenge. It was orchestrated, manipulated, a carefully laid trap designed to start a war that would benefit one man's ruthless climb to power. The problem? That man is watching her, and he's smiling. Now Frida faces an impossible choice: stay silent and let the brother of the man who destroyed her village murder him in a conspiracy that will drown the entire region in blood, or save her enemy to stop an even greater evil. She has 7 days before the Winter Council. 7 days to expose a conspiracy no one wants to believe. 7 days to decide if peace is worth fighting for, even when it means protecting the man who took everything from her. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one who burned your home. It's the one who convinced everyone it was necessary. The smell hit Frida before anything else. Salt, blood, smoke clinging to wool like a memory that refused to die. She stood in the doorway of the mead hall, her wrists still raw from the ropes. They'd only cut an hour before, and felt her throat close. Not from fear. Fear would have been a mercy. This was something worse. Recognition. The man seated at the high table, firelight carving shadows into his face, was the same man who'd held the torch to her father's longhouse while her mother screamed inside. She knew his eyes, pale gray, like winter ice over a lake. She'd seen them through the smoke that night 3 months ago, watching her village burn with the patience of someone who'd done this before, who'd do it again. Come closer. His voice wasn't cruel. That was the part that made her stomach turn. It was almost gentle, the way you'd speak to a skittish horse. Eric Bloodaxe, they called him. Jarl of the Northern Territories. The man who'd taken everything. Frida's legs moved without her permission. 1 foot, then another. The hall was crowded with warriors, their faces blurred in the smoke from the central fire. She could feel their eyes on her like hands. The dress they'd given her was clean, woolen, dyed a deep blue that must have cost someone a fortune. A costume. That's what this was. Dress the war prize in fine clothes, present her like a peace offering, pretend the blood on everyone's hands had washed away. Her fingernails dug into her palms so hard she felt skin break. They tell me you're the daughter of Jarl Halfdan. Eric's voice cut through the noise in her head. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact, the way you'd comment on the weather. The last of his line. The last. The word hung in the air like an axe before it falls. Her father. Her 2 brothers, barely old enough to hold swords. Her mother, who'd refused to leave the burning house because her youngest was still inside. All gone. And here she stood, alive, because some drunk warrior had grabbed her by the hair and dragged her out before the roof collapsed. She still didn't know if she should thank him or curse him for it. Yes. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Small victory. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing her break. Eric studied her with those winter eyes, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite regret. Something harder to name. He leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the carved armrest. The other held a cup of mead he hadn't touched. Your people attacked our trading ships. He said it quietly, like he was explaining something to a child. Killed 14 of my men, took their cargo, left their bodies for the crows. Frida's breath caught. She remembered. 4 months ago, her father had come home with barrels of grain and salted fish, celebrating a successful raid. She'd helped her mother count the supplies, grateful they'd have enough to survive the winter. She hadn't asked where it came from. You didn't ask those questions. My brother was on one of those ships. Eric's voice didn't rise, but something in it made the hair on her neck stand. 19 years old, They cut his throat and threw him overboard. The hall had gone quiet. Even the crackling fire seemed muted. Frida's mind raced, scrambling for footing on ice that kept breaking beneath her. Her father had killed Eric's brother, and then Eric had come for revenge. This wasn't senseless slaughter. This was the code. Blood for blood. Honor demanded it, which meant her father had brought this on them, on her mother, on her little brothers who'd never hurt anyone. The thought was a blade twisting in her chest. I didn't know. The words escaped before she could stop them, and she hated how weak they sounded. How true. No. Eric's expression softened, just slightly, and somehow that was worse than hatred would have been. You wouldn't have. He set down his cup and stood. He was tall, broader across the shoulders than her father had been, with scars crossing his forearms like a map of old battles. When he stepped closer, Frida forced herself not to flinch. She'd seen men like him before, show fear, and they owned you. Your clan sent you here as a peace offering. He stopped 3 paces away, close enough that she could smell leather and pine smoke on him. To end the bloodshed, to say the debt is paid. Her hands trembled. She locked them behind her back. Is it? She shouldn't have asked, but the question burned in her throat, demanding release. Is the debt paid? Eric's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Frida saw something flicker behind those winter eyes. Something that looked almost like pain. I don't know, he said finally. And the honesty in his voice was more terrifying than any threat could have been. He turned away, back toward his seat, and Frida felt the air return to her lungs. But then he paused, glancing over his shoulder. You'll have a room in the western wing. You're not a slave here, Frida. You're a guest. The word tasted like ash, she could tell. But you're not free to leave either, not yet. A guest, a prisoner, a living symbol of peace built on graves. She nodded, because what else could she do? As Eric returned to his seat and the hall erupted back into conversation, Frida stood there, frozen. Around her, warriors laughed and drank. Servants moved between tables. Someone started a bawdy song near the fire. Normal life. As if this was just another feast. As if her entire world hadn't ended. But something nagged at the edge of her awareness. A wrongness she couldn't name. She'd always been good at noticing details, the small things that didn't fit. Her mother used to say she had eyes like a hawk, and right now those eyes caught something that made her blood run cold. Eric's younger brother, Torstein, sat at the far end of the high table, handsome, with dark hair and an easy smile that made people trust him instantly. He was laughing at something a warrior said, cup raised in toast. But his eyes were on her, and they weren't warm. They were calculating. The room they gave her faced north. Frida discovered this at dawn, when pale. Light crept through the single window and touched her face like cold fingers. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fire, heard screaming, smelled burning thatch and flesh. She sat up on the narrow bed, her body aching from lying rigid all night, muscles locked in preparation for violence that never came. The room was small but clean, a wooden chest in the corner, a wool blanket that smelled of pine, a water basin on a rough table, more than a slave would get, less than a guest deserved. The middle ground was its own kind of torture. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, heavy boots, a man's stride. Frida's hand instinctively reached for a weapon that wasn't there, and the futility of it made her jaw clench. She was defenseless here, completely. A knock, 3 sharp raps. The Jarl wants you in the main hall. The voice was young, uncertain, not a threat. Frida's stomach twisted. Now. He's breaking fast with his advisors, said you should join them. Join them. Like she was family. Like she belonged at that table instead of serving it. The absurdity would have been funny if it didn't make her want to vomit. She dressed quickly in the blue woolen dress from yesterday. Her fingers fumbled with the brooches at her shoulders. Back home, her mother would have helped her with these, would have braided her hair and hummed while she worked. filling their small house with warmth even on the coldest mornings. Frida's hands stilled. Her mother was ash now, scattered by wind across charred ground. She finished the braiding herself, yanked it tight enough to hurt, and opened the door. The hall looked different in daylight, less imposing, more worn. She could see the cracks in the timber walls, the soot stains above the fire pit, the places where wood had been hastily repaired. This wasn't the grand fortress she'd imagined in the darkness. It was just a building, just people trying to survive another winter. Somehow that made it worse. Eric sat at the high table with 4 other men, all older, graying at the temples, with the scarred hands of warriors who'd survived long enough to become advisors. They stopped talking when she entered. 5 pairs of eyes locked on her like wolves spotting prey. "Frida." Eric's voice was neutral. He gestured to an empty stool at the end of the table. "Sit." She did. Her back straight, chin up, the way her father had taught her. Never show weakness. Never give them satisfaction. A serving woman placed bread and cheese in front of her, salted fish, weak ale in a wooden cup. Frida's stomach growled, betraying her. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and her body didn't care about pride or grief. It wanted to live. She took a small bite of bread. It tasted like sawdust in her dry mouth. "Gunnar was just telling me about the harvest projections for next season." Eric spoke casually, like this was normal, like she was supposed to care about grain yields. "We lost 2 fields to early frost. Storaging might be tight come spring." One of the advisors, a thick man with a braided beard, grunted agreement. "We'll need to increase trade with the southern settlements." Or raid. The word hung in the air. Raid. The way they'd raided her village. The way her father had raided them first. Frida's fingers tightened on her cup. "We're trying to build peace, not shatter it." This came from a different man, thinner, with sharp eyes that reminded her of a fox. "One successful season without bloodshed, and we can establish real trade routes. Alliance through marriage, shared resources. That's how clans survive." Marriage. Frida's pulse quickened. Was that what this was about? Were they planning to marry her off to seal some agreement? The thought made her skin crawl, but she kept her face blank. Showed nothing. Eric was watching her. She could feel his gaze even as she stared at the food in front of her. "What do you think, Frida?" Her head snapped up. "What?" "About the harvest. About trade. Versus raids." His expression was unreadable. "You grew up in a farming settlement. You understand the cycles." Was this a test? A game? Her mind raced, searching for the trap hidden in the question. "I think," she said slowly, choosing each word like stepping stones across a river, "that people do what they must to survive, and that hunger makes everyone dangerous." Something flickered in Eric's eyes. Approval? Surprise? She couldn't tell. Wise words for one so young. The fox-eyed advisor nodded. "How old are you, girl?" 22. The lie came automatically. She was 20, but adding years made people take you more seriously. Her mother had taught her that too. The conversation moved on. They discussed livestock, timber reserves, a dispute between 2 families over fishing rights. Boring, practical matters that kept clans functioning. Frida ate mechanically, only half listening, her attention caught on something else entirely. Torstein hadn't joined them. Eric's brother, who'd been so prominent at last night's feast, was absent from this morning council, and nobody mentioned it. Nobody asked where he was. Her hawk eyes scanned the room, counted the faces, noted the empty chair at Eric's right hand, where a second in command should sit. "Where's your brother?" The question escaped before she could stop it. The table went silent. Eric's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Torstein doesn't attend morning councils. He handles other matters. The dismissal was clear. Don't ask again. But Frida had already seen the looks exchanged between the advisors. Quick glances, uncomfortable shifts in posture. They knew something. Something they weren't saying. Her heart began to pound, slow and heavy like a drum before battle. One of the advisors cleared his throat. The lumber shipment from the eastern settlement should arrive by week's end. We'll need men to help unload. I'll organize it. Eric's voice was firm, ending the topic. He stood, and everyone else followed suit. Frida, walk with me. It wasn't a request. She followed him out of the hall into the cold morning air that bit at her cheeks and made her eyes water. Or maybe that was something else. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that promised snow. Winter was coming early this year. Eric led her along the wooden walkway that circled the longhouse, past storage buildings and animal pens. He didn't speak, and Frida didn't either. She'd learned that silence could be its own kind of weapon. Finally, he stopped at the edge of the settlement where the ground sloped down toward dark pine forests. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from other homesteads scattered across the valley. You're wondering why I brought you here? Eric's voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. Yes. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, his mask slipped, just for a moment. She saw exhaustion in those winter eyes, grief that mirrored her own. Because I'm tired of death, he said simply. Tired of burning villages and counting bodies. Tired of mothers screaming. And I thought maybe if you were here it would mean something, would stop the cycle. Frida's chest tightened. She wanted to hate him, needed to hate him. But standing there in the cold morning light, looking at a man who'd lost his brother the same way she'd lost hers, hatred felt too simple. Does it? Her voice cracked. Does it stop anything? Eric's expression hardened again, the vulnerability disappearing behind stone. I don't know yet. He walked away, leaving her standing at the edge of his world, caught between past and future, between vengeance and survival. And somewhere behind her, she felt eyes watching from a window high in the longhouse. 3 days passed like water through cupped hands. Frida moved through the settlement like a ghost, present but not belonging, seen but not acknowledged. The women whispered when she walked by, their voices dropping to hisses that weren't quite quiet enough. The men stared with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. She was the enemy's daughter, the peace offering, the living reminder of everything they'd lost and everything they'd done. She kept her eyes down and her mouth shut, watched, listened, remembered. That's how she noticed the pattern. It started small, a conversation that stopped abruptly when she entered the weaving room. 2 warriors arguing in low voices near the smithy, going silent the moment they saw her shadow. Eric's advisor, the fox-eyed one named Halvard, leaving the Jarl's private chamber with a face like thunder, only to transform into pleasant neutrality when he spotted her in the corridor. Something was happening beneath the surface of this place. Something wrong. On the 4th morning, Frida woke to shouting. Not the good-natured bellowing of men greeting each other, but real anger. Sharp, dangerous. She dressed quickly and slipped into the corridor, following the sound to the main hall. A crowd had gathered. Through the press of bodies, she could see Eric standing near the high table, his face carved from stone. Across from him, a young warrior she didn't recognize knelt on the floor, blood streaming from his nose. Say it again. Eric's voice was low, controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. Tell me exactly what you told Gunnar. The young man's eyes darted around the room, searching for help that wasn't coming. His hands shook. I heard that maybe the attack on Halfdan's village, maybe it wasn't. Wasn't what? Eric took a step closer. The crowd shifted, restless. Wasn't necessary. The words tumbled out in a rush. That there could have been another way. That we went too far. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Frida's heart hammered against her ribs. Someone was questioning the raid, questioning Eric's decision. This was more than gossip. This was mutiny in its infancy. Eric's jaw worked. She could see the muscle jumping beneath his beard. My brother's body washed up on shore with his throat cut. They left him for the fish. You think there was another way? Torstein said. Torstein. Eric's voice went flat, deadly. What did my brother say? The young warrior's face went pale. He'd realized his mistake too late. Nothing, Jarl, I misspoke. But the damage was done. Frida watched Eric's expression shift, watched something click into place behind those winter eyes. He looked up, scanning the crowd, and his gaze landed on Torstein standing near the back, arms crossed, face carefully neutral. For just a heartbeat, the two brothers stared at each other, and in that heartbeat, Frida saw everything. The challenge, the calculation, the unspoken war beneath the surface of loyalty. Torstein broke eye contact first, a slight smile playing at his lips. The boy's confused, brother. You know how rumors spread. Someone probably twisted my words. Probably. Eric's tone said he didn't believe it for a second. He turned back to the young warrior. Get out of my sight, and think very carefully about who you listen to. The man scrambled to his feet and fled. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversation starting up again, but the tension remained like smoke after a fire. Frida pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible, but Torstein's eyes found her anyway. He smiled. It was warm, friendly, the kind of smile that made you want to trust him. It made her skin crawl. He walked over, weaving through the remaining people with easy confidence. Up close, he was handsome in a way Eric wasn't. Softer features, laugh lines around his eyes, the kind of face that promised safety and charm. You shouldn't lurk in doorways, he said pleasantly. People might think you're spying. Frida's mouth went dry. I wasn't. I heard shouting. Of course. His smile widened. Forgive me. You're new here. You don't understand how things work yet. He leaned closer, and she smelled mead on his breath even though it was barely past dawn. Let me give you some advice, Frida. My brother is a good man, honorable, but honor can be a cage. Sometimes the kindest thing is to help someone see when they're trapped. Her pulse raced. I don't understand. You will. He patted her shoulder like a father would a child and walked away whistling. Frida stood frozen, her mind spinning. What had she just witnessed? An argument between brothers? Or something more calculated? That afternoon, she found herself in the kitchen helping prepare the evening meal. Not because anyone asked her to, but because sitting alone in her room made her feel like she was suffocating. The cook, a broad woman named Astrid, with flour permanently dusted in her hair, had given her turnips to peel without comment. The other women worked around her in practiced rhythm, and slowly, gradually, they began to forget she was the enemy's daughter and just saw another pair of hands. Did you hear about Gunnar's son? One of them, a young woman barely older than Frida, spoke in a low voice. The one who challenged the Jarl this morning? Another woman, older, clicked her tongue. Foolish boy. Not foolish. Torstein's been filling his head with ideas. Him and half the young warriors. Frida's hands stilled on the turnip. She forced herself to keep peeling, to look disinterested. Torstein wants what's best for the clan. The older woman said, but there was doubt in her voice. Does he? Or does he want what Eric has? Hush! That's dangerous talk. Everything's dangerous talk these days. They fell silent as Astrid walked past, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. But Frida had heard enough. Her mind raced, connecting pieces. Torstein questioning Eric's decisions. Young warriors suddenly brave enough to challenge their Jarl. Whispers of going too far, of other ways. This wasn't just family tension. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign to undermine Eric's authority. But why? That evening, she watched Torstein at the feast, really watched him. Saw how he moved through the hall like a current through water, stopping at each table, laughing with the warriors, clasping shoulders, filling cups. He was beloved, charismatic, everything a leader should be, and he was destroying his brother from the inside. Eric sat at the high table, alone in his leadership, and didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he noticed and didn't know what to do about it. How do you fight someone who attacks with smiles and friendship? Frida's chest tightened. She should feel satisfied. These were the people who'd killed her family. Let them tear each other apart. let them bleed. But something nagged at her, a wrongness that went deeper than simple power struggle. She thought about that young warrior's words. Maybe it wasn't necessary. The attack on her village, the massacre. What if Thorstein had pushed for it? What if he'd wanted the violence, needed the violence, for some reason she couldn't yet see? Her father's face flashed in her memory, proud, stubborn, quick to anger but quicker to forgive. He'd raided Eric's ships, yes, killed his brother. But would he have done it without reason, without provocation? What if there was more to this story than blood for blood? Frida's hands clenched in her lap. She was thinking like her mother now, always asking questions nobody else thought to ask, always seeing patterns in chaos. And the pattern she was seeing terrified her. Because if Thorstein had orchestrated the events that led to her family's death, if he'd manipulated both sides into war, then she wasn't just a peace offering in someone else's game. She was a witness, and witnesses were dangerous. The nightmare came every night now. Fire and screaming and her mother's voice calling her name through smoke so thick it burned her lungs. But tonight was different. Tonight, in the dream, she saw a face. In the flames. Not Eric's. Someone else. Watching. Smiling. Frida woke gasping, her shift soaked with sweat despite the cold. The pre-dawn darkness pressed against the window like something alive. She sat up, pulling the wool blanket around her shoulders, and tried to calm her racing heart. 3 weeks. She'd been here 3 weeks, and the pieces still didn't fit together. But they were starting to. Slowly. Like ice melting to reveal what lay beneath. She'd been careful. So careful. Watching. Without seeming to watch. Listening to conversations that stopped when she got too close. Memorizing who spoke to whom, who avoided whom, the subtle hierarchies and alliances that kept this place functioning. And what she'd learned made her blood run cold. Thorstein wasn't just beloved. He was necessary. When disputes arose between families, they went to him, not Eric. When young warriors had questions about tactics or strategy, they sought Thorstein's counsel. When the women needed someone to mediate an argument over resources, Thorstein appeared with wine and charm and solutions that left everyone feeling heard. He was the heart of this clan. Eric was just the head, and heads could be removed. Frida dressed in the darkness, her fingers working by memory now. The routine had become automatic. Braid her hair, fasten the brooches, become invisible, survive another day. She stepped into the corridor and nearly collided with someone. Careful. Halvard, Eric's fox-eyed advisor, steadied her with a hand on her elbow. His grip was firm. Too firm. You're up early. I couldn't sleep. The truth, but it felt like a confession. His sharp eyes studied her face, and she had the unsettling sensation of being dissected, examined, evaluated for some purpose she didn't understand. Walk with me, he said. Not a request. They moved through the silent longhouse, past rooms where people slept, past the great hall where embers still glowed in the fire pit. Halvard led her outside, into air. So cold it stung her lungs. The sky was beginning to lighten, gray creeping into black. He didn't speak until they were far from any buildings, standing near the wooden palisade that circled the settlement. From here she could see the forest below, dark pines dusted with early snow. You're observant, Halvard said quietly. More observant than is wise for a woman in your position. Frida's stomach dropped. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. He turned to face her, and his expression was grave. You've noticed the tension, the way loyalty is shifting like sand beneath our feet. You've seen how Thorstein moves through this place like he already owns it. Her mouth went dry. Admitting she'd noticed felt like stepping off a cliff. Halvard continued without waiting for her response. Eric is my friend. Has been since we were boys raiding coastal villages together. I've watched him grow from a reckless warrior into a leader who actually cares about his people, who wants peace, instead of endless bloodshed. His jaw tightened. and I've watched his brother undermine him for the past 2 years. 2 years. Before the raid on the trading ships, before her father's retaliation, before everything fell apart. Why are you telling me this? Frida's voice came out barely above a whisper. Because you're the only person in this settlement who has no loyalty to either brother. You have no reason to protect Torstein, and you have every reason to want Erik destroyed. He paused, letting that sink in. Which makes you the only one I can trust to see clearly. The logic was dizzying. Terrible. True. What do you want from me? Halvard's expression softened slightly, something almost like pity crossing his face. I want you to keep watching, keep listening, because something is coming. I can feel it. And when it happens, Erik will need proof. Evidence that his brother isn't the loyal supporter he pretends to be. Frida's hands trembled. She shoved them into the folds of her dress. If Torstein discovers I'm watching him, he won't. Halvard's voice was firm. Because you're just the war prize, the peace offering. Nobody thinks you're smart enough or important enough to be dangerous. The words stung because they were true. That's exactly what everyone thought. Even Torstein, with his calculating eyes and friendly smiles, saw her as a pawn, a symbol, not a threat. And if I refuse, she had to ask, even though she already knew the answer. Halvard's face went hard. Then we all die. Erik, me, you, and everyone else who stands in Torstein's way. Because whatever he's planning, it ends in blood. He walked away, leaving her alone at the edge of the settlement as dawn broke over the mountains. The light was pale, weak, doing nothing to warm the frozen ground. Frida wrapped her arms around herself and tried to think, tried to breathe. But all she could see was that face in the flames from her nightmare. Torstein's face, watching her village burn. Had he been there that night? She tried to remember, to pull details from memories blurred by smoke and terror. There had been so many warriors, so many torches. But now that she was looking for it, now that she was thinking about it, yes, she'd seen him. Standing back from the fighting, talking to someone she couldn't see clearly. He hadn't been killing, hadn't been looting, just watching, orchestrating. Her legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the palisade wall for support, splinters digging into her. Palms. If Torstein had been there, if he'd led the raid himself, then he knew exactly what he'd done, knew who he'd killed, and he'd looked her in the eye every day since she arrived and smiled like they were friends. The rage that swept through her was so intense it left her shaking. Not the cold, calculating anger she'd been nursing for weeks. This was hot, visceral, the kind of fury that made people do stupid, reckless things. She forced it down, swallowed it like poison and felt it burn all the way to her stomach. If Halvard was right, if something was coming, then she needed to be smart, needed to think like her mother, who'd always said the sharpest weapon was the one nobody saw coming. That day, Frida changed tactics. Instead of trying to be invisible, she became present. She sat in the great hall during meals, close enough to hear conversations, but not close enough to join them. She helped in the kitchen and listened to the women gossip. She walked through the settlement at different times, noting who met with whom in shadowed corners. And she started to see it. The network Torstein had built. Young warriors who hung on his every word. Older men who felt sidelined by Erik's peace efforts. Families who'd lost sons in battles and wanted someone to blame. Torstein gave them what Erik couldn't. Validation for their anger, permission for their violence, and the promise that things would return to the way they'd been. When men were feared, when raids brought glory, when the strong took what they wanted and the weak suffered. It was seductive, simple, wrong. That evening, as she served mead in the great hall, Frida passed close to where Torstein sat with 3 warriors she recognized as his most loyal followers. She moved slowly, carefully, ears straining. "Won't be much longer now," one of them was saying, voice low. 2 weeks, maybe 3, once the northern Jarls arrive for the winter council. "Careful!" Torstein's voice cut through, pleasant, but with an edge like a blade wrapped in silk. Walls have ears. His eyes met hers. For just a moment, the mask slipped. She saw cold calculation there. Assessment. Then the charm returned, and he winked at her like they were sharing a joke. Frida's hands didn't shake as she poured his mead, didn't tremble as she moved away, but inside, every nerve screamed danger. Winter Council. 2 weeks. Whatever Torstein was planning, it would happen then, when other Jarls were present, when Erik would be most vulnerable. She had to tell someone, had to warn Erik. But who would believe the daughter of his enemy? Who would take her word over Torstein's? As she lay in bed that night, sleepless again, one thought circled through her mind like a wolf around a campfire. She'd spent 3 weeks learning how to survive in this place. Now she had 2 weeks to figure out how to stop a murder. The opportunity came on the 7th day before the Winter Council, when the sky hung low and heavy with snow that hadn't yet fallen. Frida was crossing the courtyard when she saw Erik emerge from the forge, soot streaked across his face, deep in conversation with the blacksmith. The sight stopped her mid-step. The Jarl himself, hands black with coal dust, sleeves rolled up despite the cold, not standing apart, not above the work, in it. Her father would never have set foot in a forge unless it was to commission a weapon. Erik noticed her staring. The blacksmith said something that made him nod, then walked back into the forge's warmth. Erik approached her, wiping his hands on a rag that only seemed to spread the soot around. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, and there was something almost like humor in his voice. "I didn't expect to see you working the forge." The words came out before she could filter them. "Why not? The blacksmith's apprentice broke his arm yesterday. Someone needs to help pump the bellows." He studied her face and his expression shifted. "You think I'm above manual labor? Most Jarls are. Most Jarls are fools." He tossed the rag aside. "A leader who doesn't understand how his people survive won't lead them for long. Come, walk with me." It wasn't quite a command, wasn't quite an invitation. Frida fell into step beside him as he headed toward the eastern edge of the settlement, where the ground rose toward rocky outcroppings that overlooked the valley. Her heart hammered. This was her chance, maybe her only chance. But how did you tell a man his brother was planning to kill him? Where did those words even start? They climbed in silence, the only sound their breathing and the crunch of frost beneath their boots. At the top, Erik stopped, looking out over his lands. From here, Frida could see smoke rising from distant homesteads, the silver thread of a river cutting through dark forest, the vast emptiness of winter settling over everything like a shroud. "My father built this settlement 30 years ago," Erik said quietly. "Carved it out of nothing but rock and pine and stubborn will. He taught me that leadership isn't about taking, it's about protecting what you've built." He glanced at her. "Your father believed differently." The words should have angered her. Instead, they just made her tired. "My father believed in survival, in taking what you needed before someone took it from you. And look where it led." The truth of it hit like a fist. Her father's philosophy had gotten him killed, had gotten her mother killed, her brothers, everyone. And for what? A few barrels of grain? Pride? "I'm trying to break the cycle," Erik continued. "Trying to prove that clans can coexist without constant bloodshed. That peace is possible. But every day, I feel it slipping through my fingers like water." This was it. The opening. Frida's throat went tight. Because not everyone wants peace. Erik's jaw clenched. "My brother." So he knew, or suspected. Relief and terror flooded through her in equal measure. "He's planning something," Frida said, the words tumbling out now. "During the Winter Council, I heard him talking to his men. He's been undermining you for years, turning people against your decisions, making them question your strength." Erik's face remained impassive, but something flickered in those winter eyes. Pain, resignation, like he'd been waiting for this confirmation but hoping he was wrong. "You've been watching." It wasn't a question. "Halvard put you up to this." Frida's stomach dropped. He asked me to keep my eyes open, but I would have noticed anyway. I'm good at seeing patterns. My mother taught me. The mention of her mother made her voice crack, and she hated it, hated the weakness. Eric was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Torstein is my brother, my blood. We grew up together, fought together, survived our father's death together. How do I condemn him based on whispers and suspicions? You can't. The answer felt like defeat, but it was true. Not without proof, not without catching him in the act. And if I wait for proof, I might not live long enough to act on it. Eric's hands curled into fists at his sides. That's the trap, isn't it? Act too soon and I look like a tyrant destroying his own brother over paranoia. Wait too long, and I'm dead. The helplessness in his voice surprised her. She'd thought Jarls were supposed to be certain, decisive, unshakable. But Eric sounded like what he was, a man trying to do the impossible, watching everything he'd built crumble beneath him. There has to be a way, Frida said, though she had no idea what it was. Eric turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw him clearly, not as the man who'd destroyed her village, not as the enemy, just as someone carrying a weight too heavy for one person to bear. Why are you helping me? The question was direct, cutting. I killed your family, burned your home. You should want me dead more than anyone. Frida's breath caught. She'd asked herself the same question 100 times in the dark hours before dawn. The answer wasn't simple, wasn't clean. Because I've been watching Torstein too, she said slowly. And I think he wanted the war between our clans. I think he manipulated events to make it happen, which means he's as responsible for my family's death as anyone. She met Eric's gaze, refusing to look away. And because if he succeeds in killing you, he'll start a bloodbath that will make what happened to my village look like mercy. He doesn't want peace. He wants power. And he'll burn everything to get it. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. They were allies now, born of necessity and shared enemies. It felt wrong, felt like betrayal of everyone she'd lost, but it also felt like the only path forward that didn't end in more graves. The Winter Council, Eric said finally. 7 Jarls will be here, witnesses, if Torstein makes his move. Then it'll be because he's convinced them I'm weak, that I've lost control, that I'm not fit to lead. His expression hardened. We need to give him enough rope to hang himself. How? I don't know yet. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear in every line of his body. But I know I can't do it alone. Halvard is loyal, but he's one man. I need someone Torstein won't suspect, someone who can move through the settlement without drawing attention. Understanding hit like ice. Water. Me. You. Eric's eyes held hers. I know what I'm asking. I know the danger. If he discovers what you're doing, he'll kill me. The certainty of it settled in her bones. Just like he'll kill you if we do nothing. You don't owe me this. Don't owe me anything. Frida thought about her mother's face, her brother's laughter, her father's stubborn pride that had doomed them all. She thought about Torstein's calculating smile and the way he moved through the hall like a predator among sheep. She thought about the young warriors he was poisoning with false promises and easy violence. No, she agreed. I don't owe you, but I owe them. She gestured vaguely toward the valley, toward all the people going about their lives, unaware of the storm gathering. They don't deserve to die because 2 brothers can't resolve their differences, and my family doesn't deserve to have their deaths used as justification for more killing. Something shifted in Eric's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred stubbornness. Then we have 7 days, he said. 7 days to find proof of whatever Torstein is planning. 7 days to save this clan from tearing itself apart. 7 days, Frida echoed, and the number felt impossibly small. They stood there on the rocky outcropping as the first snowflakes began to fall. 2 people who should have been enemies, bound together by desperation and the terrible knowledge that sometimes survival meant making alliances with the people. Who'd hurt you most? Below them, the settlement continued on, oblivious. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children played in the courtyard. Life persisted, but in 7 days, everything would change. One way or another, blood would be spilled. The only question was whose. The snow fell for 3 days straight, blanketing the settlement in silence that felt like a held breath. Frida moved through those days like a woman walking on ice, every step calculated, every word measured. She'd become what Eric needed her to be, invisible, forgettable, beneath notice, but her eyes missed nothing. She watched Torstein gather his inner circle in shadowed corners, always with mead, always with laughter that carried just a bit too far. She noted which warriors sought him out after Eric made decisions, their faces tight with barely concealed resentment. She memorized the pattern of his movements, the rhythm of his manipulations, and slowly, horribly, she began to understand how good he was at this. On the 4th day, with 3 days remaining before the Jarls arrived, something changed. Frida was in the storage rooms helping inventory grain supplies when she heard voices approaching. She recognized Torstein's smooth tenor immediately. Instinct made her duck behind a stack of barrels, pressing herself into the shadows. Can't afford doubt. Not now. A different voice, older, gravelly. She recognized it as belonging to Sten, one of Eric's longest-serving warriors. If even one of the visiting Jarls questions the plan, they won't. Torstein's confidence was absolute. I've been corresponding with them for months. They're already convinced Eric is leading us toward weakness. Tomorrow's incident will just confirm what they already believe. Frida's heart stopped. Tomorrow. Whatever was coming, it was tomorrow. And the girl? Sten's voice dropped lower. Halfdan's daughter. She's been watching, asking questions. A pause. Frida could hear her own pulse pounding in her ears. The war. Prize? Torstein laughed, and the sound made her skin crawl. She's grieving and lost. Let her watch. What can she possibly do? She has no allies, no power, no proof of anything. Even if she went to Eric with wild accusations, who would believe her? The daughter of the man he killed, trying to turn him against his own blood. Another pause. Besides, she might be useful. When Eric is gone, someone will need to broker peace with the remnants of Halfdan's clan, a living symbol of continuity. Gone. He'd said gone, not killed. The distinction felt important somehow, though Frida couldn't process why through the roaring in her ears. Their voices faded as they moved away, leaving her crouched in darkness, trembling. Tomorrow. An incident. Something that would make Eric look weak in front of his own warriors. Give Torstein the opening he needed. She had to warn Eric. Had to tell him now. Frida emerged from the storage room, forcing her breathing to steady, and nearly collided with Halvard. His sharp eyes took in her pale face, the tension in her shoulders. You heard something. Not a question. She nodded, throat too tight for words, and gestured for him to follow her outside where they couldn't be overheard. The cold air bit at her face as she quickly recounted what she'd heard, watching Halvard's expression grow grimmer with each word. Tomorrow, he muttered, cursing under his breath. We're out of time. Where's Eric? Meeting with the timber merchants. He won't be. Back until evening. Halvard's jaw clenched. Then we wait. We tell him tonight, and we don't let him out of our sight tomorrow. But waiting felt like swallowing poison. Every hour that passed was another hour for something to go wrong. Frida moved through the rest of the day in a fog of tension, jumping at shadows, seeing threats in every face. When evening finally came and Eric returned, she and Halvard found him in his private chamber, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. The timber negotiations had clearly not gone well. This had better be urgent, Eric said, pouring himself ale with hands that shook slightly from cold or fatigue. I've spent the entire day arguing over prices with merchants who think winter desperation means they can rob me blind. Torstein is making his move tomorrow. Halvard didn't waste time on preamble. Frida overheard him planning something he called an incident, something designed to make you look weak in front of your own people. Eric's hand froze halfway to his mouth. He set the cup down carefully, like it might shatter. Tell me everything. Frida recounted the conversation word for word, her mother's training and memory serving her now. When she finished, Eric was silent for so long she wondered if he'd heard her at all. He's been corresponding with the visiting Jarls, Eric finally said, voice hollow, poisoning them against me before they even arrive. By the time they witness whatever he has planned, they'll already believe I'm unfit to lead. He looked up, and Frida saw something that terrified her more than Torstein's threats. Defeat. He's thought of everything. No. The word came out sharper than Frida intended. Both men looked at her in surprise. He's thought of most things, but he's made one mistake. He thinks I'm stupid, harmless. He said so himself, which means he won't be watching me. What are you suggesting? Halvard leaned forward, interest sharp in his eyes. Frida's mind raced, pieces clicking together. He's planning an incident that makes Eric look weak. Something public, something that demonstrates he's lost control or lost his edge or lost something the visiting Jarls will see as essential to leadership. She paced the small room, thinking out loud. It has to be something Eric will react to emotionally, not strategically. Something that hits him where he's vulnerable. Eric's face had gone carefully blank, but she saw the muscle jump in his jaw. Family, he said, quietly. The only thing that makes me act without thinking is family, which is why he knows you won't move against him without absolute proof. Frida said, the bond between you is both your greatest strength and your fatal weakness. So what do we do? Eric's voice was raw. Wait for him to spring whatever trap he's set and hope we can recover from it? No. An idea was forming in Frida's mind, dangerous and half-formed. We give him what he wants. We let him think his plan is working. And then we turn it back on him. Halvard's eyes narrowed. You want to use Eric as bait. I want to give Torstein enough confidence to reveal himself completely, in front of witnesses who matter. Frida turned to Eric. You said the visiting Jarls are already poisoned against you. What if we poison them back? What if we make them question everything Torstein has told them? How? Eric's voice held the faintest edge of hope, dangerous and desperate. I don't know yet. Frida's honesty felt like failure. But I know we need to understand what he's planning. We need details, timing, exactly how he intends to make you look weak. I can help with that. Halvard stood, purpose in every line of his body. Sten is involved, and Sten has a weakness. His daughter is sick, has been for weeks. If I suggest I know someone who might help her, you'll use a child's illness as leverage? Eric's voice went cold. I'll offer genuine help and hope it buys us information. Halvard's tone was firm. The girl is suffering either way. At least this way, something good might come from it. The moral calculus made Frida's stomach turn, but she understood it. Desperate times. Impossible choices. This was the world they lived in now. Eric rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up, he seemed to have aged years and minutes. Do it. But Halvard, if you can actually help that child, you do it. Regardless of what information we get. I won't build victory on a child's suffering. Something in Frida's chest loosened. This was why Torstein would fail, she realized. Because Eric still had lines he wouldn't cross. Still had humanity. Torstein had shed like old skin. The question was whether humanity would be enough to survive what was coming. One more thing, Eric said as Halvard moved toward the door. Tomorrow, whatever happens, Frida stays visible. Stays where people can see her. If Torstein thinks she's harmless, we use that. Let him dismiss her while she watches everything. Frida nodded, fear and determination warring in her chest. Tomorrow, she would stand in the open while conspiracy swirled around her. Would watch a man try to destroy his brother and pretend she saw nothing. Would become the witness that could save them all or condemn them to death. Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of morning where every sound carried like a shout. Frida dressed with shaking hands, her stomach a knot of dread so tight she could barely breathe. Today, whatever Torstein had planned, it would happen today. She found Eric already in the great hall, breaking fast alone. His face was drawn, shadowed with sleeplessness, but his eyes were alert. Sharp, When he saw her, he gave the smallest nod. Ready. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Frida positioned herself in the weaving room with the other women, close enough to the main hall to hear raised voices, far enough to seem removed from men's business. Her hands worked the loom mechanically while her mind raced, parsing every sound, every footfall in the corridor outside. Halvard had spent the night with Sten's sick daughter and returned at mid-morning with information that made Frida's blood run cold. The plan was simple, brutal, and designed to destroy Erik in a single stroke. During the afternoon training session, when all the warriors gathered to practice combat, one of Thorstein's men would challenge Erik directly, question his strength, his fitness to lead. And when Erik responded, as honor demanded he must, the challenger would take a fall. Make it look like Erik had lost control, had struck with excessive force, had injured a man who only spoke uncomfortable truths. In front of everyone. In front of the whole settlement that would witness their Jarl acting like a tyrant instead of a leader. It gets worse, Halvard had said, his voice tight. The challenger is Arne, young, barely 20, popular with the warriors, and he's Gunnar's nephew. Gunnar, Erik's most trusted advisor after Halvard. If Erik injured his nephew, even accidentally, even in a setup, the betrayal would split the clan down the middle. Now, as the afternoon training hour approached, Frida watched warriors gather in the courtyard through the weaving room window. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Erik was already there, stripped to his shirt despite the cold, preparing to lead drills as he did every week. Thorstein stood at the edge of the crowd, relaxed, smiling, talking to Arne with a hand on the young man's shoulder. The picture of brotherly support. Frida set down her weaving and moved toward the door. One of the older women gave her a sharp look. "Where are you going?" "To watch the training." Frida kept her voice light, curious. "I've never seen proper warrior drills before." The woman snorted. "It's not for women." "Then I'll stay at the edge, out of the way." Frida was already moving, not waiting for permission. She positioned herself near the wooden fence that bordered the training ground, just another observer drawn by the spectacle of men testing their strength. Several other women had gathered as well, along with children and older men no longer fit for fighting. A crowd, witnesses, exactly what Thorstein wanted. The drills began normally, warriors paired off, practicing strikes and blocks with wooden practice weapons. Erik moved among them, correcting stances, demonstrating techniques, his movements economical and precise. He was good, better than good. Even Frida, who knew nothing of combat, could see the controlled power in every motion, which was exactly why Thorstein's plan would work. Erik's skill would make the accident seem more believable, more damning. 20 minutes into the session, Arne stepped forward. His face was pale but determined, and Frida saw his hand shake slightly as he raised his practice sword. "Jarl Erik." His voice carried across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "I request permission to spar with you." Erik turned, surprise flickering across his face. It wasn't unusual for warriors to request matches with their leader, but something in Arne's tone, something in the way the crowd had gone silent, set off warning bells that Frida could see register in Erik's eyes. "Of course." Erik's voice was measured. "Careful. Take your stance." They circled each other, wooden swords raised. The crowd pressed closer, tension thick as smoke. Frida's fingernails dug into the wooden fence so hard she felt splinters pierce her skin. Arne attacked first, a clumsy overhand strike that Erik deflected easily. Too easily. The boy was holding back, fighting worse than his skill level, making himself an easy target. Erik seemed to realize it too. His movements became more defensive, less aggressive, like he was trying to avoid the trap he could feel closing around him. "Come on, Jarl." Arne's voice carried, pitched for the crowd. "Don't hold back. Or have you grown soft with all this talk of peace?" The insult hung in the cold air. Gasps rippled through the watching warriors. That kind of disrespect couldn't be ignored. Honor demanded a response. Erik's jaw clenched, but his voice remained level. "Your form is sloppy, Arne. Fix your stance before you worry about my strength." My stance is fine. Arna pressed forward with another wild swing. Maybe you're just afraid to show what you've become. A Jarl who'd rather negotiate than fight, who brings our enemies into our home and calls it peace. He was talking about her. Frida's stomach dropped. Of course, she wasn't just a witness to this. She was part of it. The visible symbol of everything Torstein wanted people to hate about Eric's leadership. Enough. Eric's voice went hard. You've made your point. Stand down. Make me. Arna's practice sword came up in challenge, and Frida saw it then. Saw the fear in the boy's eyes beneath the bravado. He didn't want this. Was terrified. But he was going through with it anyway because someone he trusted had convinced him it was necessary. Torstein had used this boy. Had taken his loyalty and twisted it into a weapon. Eric moved then, faster than Frida's eyes could follow. His practice sword swept Arn's aside, and in the same motion he stepped in close, using his shoulder to unbalance the younger man. It was a training move, controlled, designed to demonstrate superior technique without causing injury. But Arna fell wrong, deliberately wrong, Frida realized with horror. He twisted as he went down, throwing himself onto his own practice sword in a way that would leave bruises, maybe crack ribs. He hit the ground hard and cried out, the sound sharp with genuine pain. The courtyard erupted. Warriors surged forward. Gunnar was suddenly there, kneeling beside his nephew, horror written across his face. "You struck him down!" Someone in the crowd shouted. "Attacked him for speaking truth." "He challenged me," Eric said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was staring at Arna with something like shock, like he couldn't believe what had just happened. Torstein stepped forward, his face a mask of concern. "Brother, what have you done? He's just a boy. You could have disarmed him without—" "I barely touched him." Eric's voice was rising now, defensive, and Frida's heart sank because that was exactly the wrong response. Made him sound guilty, uncertain, weak. This was it, the moment Torstein had orchestrated. In a few hours, the visiting Jarls would arrive to find a settlement in turmoil. Warriors, questioning their leader, a young man injured for speaking his mind. Everything Torstein had told them about Eric's unfitness would seem prophetic. And there was nothing Frida could do to stop it. She was just a woman, just the war prize. Her word meant nothing. But then she heard it, a small voice, clear in the chaos. He threw himself down on purpose. Every head turned. A child stood at the fence, no more than 8 years old, pointing at Arna with complete certainty. I saw him. He made himself fall wrong. Like when my brother pretends I hurt him to get me in trouble. The courtyard went silent. Frida's breath caught. From the mouths of children, her mother used to say, "Come truths adults are too clever to see." Torstein's face went carefully neutral, but Frida saw the flash of panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth to dismiss the child's words, to laugh them off as innocent confusion. But Frida stepped forward before he could speak. "The child is right." Her voice shook, but she forced it steady. "I was watching." Arna twisted as he fell, made it worse than it needed to be. She met Eric's eyes across the courtyard. Anyone with eyes could see it if they were looking for it. "She's lying." Torstein's voice remained calm, but she heard the edge beneath. She'd say anything to protect Eric. She's his creature now. "I'm no one's creature." Frida's hands curled into fists. "But I know what I saw, and I know why Arna did it." She turned to face the crowd, to address the warriors watching with confused, suspicious faces. Because someone convinced him it was necessary. Someone told him Eric was weak and needed to be exposed. Someone used his loyalty as a weapon. Enough. Gunnar's voice cut through, raw with emotion. He was still kneeling beside his nephew, but his face had changed. Had gone from horror to something harder, colder. He looked down at Arna. "Is it true, boy? Did you fall on purpose?" Arna's face crumpled, and in his eyes Frida saw the moment he realized he'd been used, that whatever promises had been made to him were dust. His voice broke. "Lord Torstein said—" Everything stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. Torstein's mask shattered. For just a moment, Frida saw raw fury in his eyes, saw the man beneath the charm. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded innocence. The boy is confused, injured. He doesn't know what he's saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Arna's voice was stronger now, anger burning through fear. You told me Erik was leading us to ruin, that someone had to show the visiting Jarls the truth, that it was my duty to stand up to him even if it meant getting hurt. The words fell like stones into still water, and the ripples spread outward, touching everything. The silence that followed Arna's confession was absolute. Frida watched Torstein's face cycle through expressions too fast to name, landing finally on betrayal. Wounded, misunderstood. It was masterful, really. Even now, even caught, he was still playing the game. You're confused, Arna. Torstein's voice dripped with false compassion. The fall addled your head. I never said any such thing. I would never ask you to harm yourself to undermine my own brother. But something had shifted in the crowd. Frida could feel it like a change in wind direction. Doubt had crept in, and once doubt took root, it grew fast. Erik stepped forward, his practiced sword still in hand, face carved from stone. Everyone, clear the training ground. Now. The warriors hesitated, looking between the two brothers. The tension was a living thing, coiled and ready to strike. You heard the Jarl. Halvard's voice cut through, commanding, "Move." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed. But they didn't go far. Frida could see them lingering at doorways, windows, anywhere they could watch what happened next. History was being made, and no one wanted to miss it. Gunnar helped Arna to his feet, his face thunderous. "We'll talk later," he said to his nephew, voice tight with barely controlled fury. Then to Erik, "I need to know the truth, all of it. You'll have it." Erik's eyes never left Torstein. "But first, I need to speak with my brother. Alone." "No." Frida's voice surprised even herself. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Not alone. Whatever happens here needs witnesses, real witnesses, people who can't be dismissed or silenced later." Erik's jaw clenched, but after a moment, he nodded. Halvard stays, Gunnar stays, and Frida stays. Torstein's laugh was bitter. "Of course. You trust the daughter of your enemy more than your own blood. That says everything about what you've become, brother." "What I've become?" Erik's control finally cracked, voice rising. "You orchestrated a conspiracy to make me look weak. You manipulated a boy into injuring himself. You've been poisoning my warriors against me for years. And you dare talk about what I've become? I did what was necessary." Torstein's mask dropped completely now, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "You were destroying everything Father built. All your talk of peace and coexistence. Vikings don't survive through weakness, Erik. We survive through strength, through fear, through taking what we need before someone else takes it from us. That's not strength. That's just cruelty dressed up in tradition." Erik's voice shook. "And Father would have hated what you've become. Father would have hated what you've become." Torstein stepped closer, and Frida saw the resemblance between them now. Same jaw, same eyes, same stubborn pride. But where Erik's pride came from principle, Torstein's came from entitlement. Bringing that girl here, the daughter of the man who killed our brother, treating her like a guest instead of the war prize she is. Talking about trade routes instead of raids. You've made us soft, made us vulnerable. I made us stable." Erik's fists clenched. "For the first time in 3 generations, we're not hemorrhaging. Young men in pointless raids. We're not burying children who starved because we spent all our resources on weapons instead of seeds. We're building something that lasts. You're building a cage." Torstein's voice dropped to something almost intimate, almost sad. "And I won't let you lock us in it." The admission hung in the air, not a denial, a declaration. Halvard moved then, hand going to the knife at his belt. "That sounds like treason. It's not treason to save your people from a weak leader." Torstein's eyes swept the room, calculating. Even now, he was looking for an advantage, for allies. "Ask them," Ask the warriors who've served this clan for decades. Ask if they want peace or glory. Ask if they want to die as farmers or be remembered as Vikings. I'll ask them. A new voice cut through, and everyone turned. The doorway framed a man Frida didn't recognize. Tall, graying, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades of harsh winters and harder battles. Behind him stood 3 other men, all carrying themselves with the authority of leadership, the visiting Jarls. They'd arrived early. Frida's heart stopped. How much had they heard? Enough to condemn Eric, or enough to see through Torstein's manipulations? The gray-haired Jarl stepped forward, his eyes sharp as he surveyed the scene. I am Jarl Ragnar of the Western Territories. We came early hoping to avoid ceremony and speak plainly with Eric Bloodaxe. His gaze moved between the brothers. It seems we arrived at an opportune moment. Torstein recovered first, his charm sliding back into place like armor. Jarl Ragnar, welcome. I apologize that you had to witness this family disagreement. My brother and I have differing views on how to lead our people. I'm sure you understand such tensions. I understand conspiracy when I see it. Ragnar's voice was flat, unimpressed. We've been standing outside for 5 minutes, long enough to hear a young warrior admit you manipulated him into staging a false confrontation. Long enough to hear you admit you've been working to undermine your own Jarl. Torstein's face went pale. You misunderstood. I've been leading men for 40 years, boy. I don't misunderstand much. Ragnar turned to Eric. Your brother wrote to us months ago, told us you were weak, told us you'd lost your edge, told us you brought your enemy's daughter into your home and treated her like family. He paused. What he didn't tell us was that you were trying to end 3 generations of pointless bloodshed, that you were building alliances through trade instead of terror. That takes more strength than any raid. Frida felt something loosen in her chest. Relief so intense it made her dizzy. Eric's shoulders straightened, but his voice remained measured. With respect, Jarl Ragnar, strength means nothing if it's built on lies and manipulation. My brother has legitimate grievances. Many of our people share his concerns. I can't simply ignore that. You're right. Ragnar nodded slowly. You can't, which is why we're going to settle this the old way. At the thing, tomorrow. Let your people speak. Let them choose whether they want the peace you offer or the glory your brother promises. Let them decide what kind of clan they want to be. The thing. The assembly where all free men could speak, where disputes were settled by consensus rather than force. It was the foundation of their law, their society, and it was a gamble, because Torstein had spent years building his influence. He was beloved, charismatic, and Eric, for all his principles, had made himself unpopular with his talk of peace. Torstein seemed to realize this too. A slow smile spread across his face. An excellent idea, Jarl Ragnar. Let the people choose. I'll abide by their decision. As will I. Eric's voice was steady, but Frida saw the fear beneath. He was risking everything on the hope that his people would see reason over rhetoric, that they'd choose future over past, that they'd choose him over his brother. As the Jarls filed out to find quarters, as Hallvard and Gunnar began discussing logistics for tomorrow's assembly, Frida found herself standing beside Eric. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. Tomorrow the clan would choose its path. And whatever happened, there would be no going back. Thank you. Eric's voice was quiet, meant only for her, for speaking up, for seeing what no one else wanted to see. Frida looked at him, at this man who'd destroyed her family and then given her a purpose, who'd shown her that sometimes the line between enemy and ally was thinner than breath. I didn't do it for you, she said honestly. I did it because I'm tired of death, tired of watching good people destroy each other over pride and old grudges. She paused, and because someone needed to prove that even enemies can choose something better. Eric's smile was sad, weary, but genuine. Maybe that's the real strength. Not in winning wars, but in ending them. That night, Frida stood at her window, watching snow fall over the settlement. Somewhere out there, Torstein was planning his arguments for tomorrow. Somewhere, warriors were choosing sides. Somewhere, the future was being written in whispered conversations and difficult decisions. And here, in this small room, in this northern stronghold, the daughter of a dead Jarl prepared to stand before an assembly and speak truth to power, to be a witness not just to conspiracy, but to the possibility that cycles of violence could be broken, that peace was worth fighting for, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was refuse to hate the people who'd hurt you. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring change. But tonight, Frida allowed herself something she hadn't felt since the night her village burned. Hope, small, fragile, but alive. And that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was enough. Frida walked into that settlement as a symbol of everything that had been destroyed. She left it as proof that even the deepest wounds can become bridges if we're brave enough to build them. She could have chosen revenge, could have let hatred consume her the way fire consumed her home. Instead, she chose something infinitely harder. She chose to see her enemy as human, to recognize that cycles of violence only end when someone has the courage to step outside them, even when every instinct screams for blood. The question isn't whether she made the right choice. The question is, could you have done the same? Could you stand in front of the man who destroyed your family and choose his life over your vengeance? Could you risk everything to save people who saw you as nothing more than a war prize? Sometimes strength isn't about how hard you can strike. It's about knowing when to lower your fist. It's about understanding that the truest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's transforming them into something else. Entirely. Frida didn't just survive her grief. She weaponized it into something powerful. The refusal to let more mothers scream, more children burn, more families shatter under the weight of pride and old grudges. She proved that even in the darkest chapters of our lives, we get to choose what comes next. We get to decide if our pain makes us destroyers or builders. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the choices we make when everything has been taken from us, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a like to support more stories that challenge us to be better than our worst moments. And follow for more tales that remind us that humanity persists, even in the coldest winters, even in the aftermath of fire. Because the stories we tell ourselves about enemies and forgiveness, about strength and survival, those are the stories that shape who we become. What story are you choosing to tell?